A very good morning to everyone. I'm Vaish from the Culture Academy and I will be your MC for today. For those who are joining us for the first time, welcome to Culture Academy's 8th edition of the In Conversation with series. Today's webinar is the second webinar for 2021. We have about 200 attendees today, including some of our friends who are tuning in from overseas. Our In Conversation with series offers an open platform for the arts and culture sector leaders, professionals, and administrators to come together to present and share any aspect of their work and insights. This allows more interesting discussions and cross-pollination of ideas and sharing of best practices on issues that matter to the arts and culture sector. Today, we are very pleased to have with us Mr. Peter Tullin, co-founder Remix Submits, Mr. Syaheed, MSBI, Head of Artist Services, Southeast Asia and Oceania Belief, and Mr. Joe Au, Chief Executive Officer, Systic.com Private Limited, who will be sharing their views and insights on the topic of monetizing arts and culture in the digital world. The session will be moderated by Mr. Loh Eng Teong, Deputy Chief Executive, Sector Development, National Arts Council. For the Q&A session, please feel free to post your questions under the Q&A function anytime, and our speakers will be able to address them during the Q&A session. Without further ado, I will now hand the time over to our moderator, Mr. Loh Eng Teong, to introduce the webinar and the speakers. Mr. Loh, over to you, please.
Hi, good morning, everyone, and thanks, Vasi, for the opening. Welcome to this session, and I'm very delighted to be able to moderate this session. As you can see, we have invited a group of very distinguished panelists, which they are all, to me, veterans of the industries. Now, before we get to that, COVID-19, the pandemic. I think to say that COVID-19 and the pandemic, the pandemic itself that's disrupted us now seems almost like an understatement. I mean, who would know that for the last 1.5 years, we'll be in this state where the pandemic has kind of almost brought cities, countries, our lives to almost a standstill at times, right? When cities go into lockdown and all. This disruption has been tremendous across everybody and, of course, across countries and globally as well. It almost reminds us of that globally, we are always going through a lot of changes. And some of you might have heard this called the four horsemen of the apocalypse, whereby the driving forces of demographics, changing demographics, the widening inequalities, technology, and as well as climate change has been causing a lot of changes within the world. And then came the pandemic, which many now may consider as even the fifth horseman of the change. That's precipitating I would say, maybe the biggest and the most severe economic and society transformation that we may be seeing, perhaps even since the Industrial Revolution. But throughout all these kind of disruptions, impact, we also see that the humankind as us constantly are trying very hard to adapt to this to all these changes. And across the sectors, across the industry, we are trying to adapt by going digital. And that's why today our panel of how we are monetizing digital and arts culture offering in the future is such an important question now. We were asking this question before the pre-COVID days, but this question now takes on even a more important role now as we move forward. And before I start to introduce the panels to do their sharing with you, I just like to take the time to park 5 data points with you this morning so they can keep at the back of your mind when you kind of hear the presenters share their views. And these 5 data points actually are extracted from a digital consumption survey, COVID survey, that is conducted by the NAC research team, which is headed by our Chief Research Officer, Dr. Sharon Cheng, and team, as well as together with Kanta. And I'd just like to acknowledge the good work. And actually, the data and the report itself is actually available, made public, and it's on the NAC website. So this digital consumption, arts consumption survey during COVID-19 was done through the period from 31st August 2020 to the 4th of January 2021. So over a span of a couple of months, And as you know, during that period, we were last year, particularly in November, we're beginning to open up and returning to live performances. I will just keep to 5 big data points to share with you. First is that across the survey, we noted that the digital engagement has been actually very high, even during the period when we were kind of reopening up and live performance was resuming in small numbers. The high engagement shows that almost close on average, more than 80%. In fact, on average, when we did the survey throughout that period, about around 85% or so people said that they are continuing engaged with online arts consumption. 85%, thereabout, right? So that's very high. The next data point that I thought would be of interest is that amongst this group that we surveyed, 81% actually said that the most popular platform that they go onto for art consumption, digital consumption, is online video platforms, 81%. And I'm going to kind of cheat a little bit by saying that I did say 5 data points. This is a kind of set of small data point, a group of data points that I thought would be interesting for our topic for today. And that is that 85% of them consume free online consumption. Only 15% survey indicate that they pay for online content. Amongst the consumption, 63% are foreign arts content and 37% are local arts content. So 63 foreign art content, 37 local. And interestingly, when they asked whether they enjoyed the performances, paid or free, 64% said that they enjoyed the paid performances more than free. And since that we are talking about monetizing, the next data point, the 4th data point I would like to share is that when we ask them, are you willing to pay for the digital content? Only 1 in 4 say that they are willing to spend $20 or more. Only 1 in 4 say that they are prepared to pay $20 or more. That's Singapore dollars or more. But most still prefer free content. And the last data point, I think, is more personal when we ask them, say, would you still consume arts digitally or online, even when, say, if we reach the stage where we are so-called in the new normal? 80% said that they will continue to still consume arts online, 80%. So I think that is a really positive indicator that there is a lot of potential there. So I leave these 5 key data points with you at the back of your mind while we continue this conversation of what it means to monetize the arts in this digital age. Now, today we'll begin by having 3 very distinguished panel members. They're all, as I said, industry veterans. And I will not introduce all of them at one go. I'll introduce them one by one before they give their presentation, and then we'll proceed to the Q&A. So first up, I'd like to invite, of course, Mr. Peter Tullin, who is actually dialing in from overseas, from Melbourne. I'm glad he could join us today. So Peter is a co-founder of Remix Summits, and that's where he actually explores the future of the creative industry through summits that's held in major cities around the world. I'm quite sure some of you might also have attended some of those summits as well. He actually co-founded the culturelabel.com, a venture capital funded e-commerce site selling art and design products from 500 over leading cultural brands and artists, including the Tate, Victoria and Albert Museum, and the Guggenheim. He is also the co-author of Intelligent Naivety, a handbook that helps creative entrepreneurs turn ideas into reality. And he also collaborated with the Australia Centre for the Moving Image to develop ACMIX, a co-working space for creative technologies. He serves on several boards, including the Museum Victoria, Geelong Arts Centre, as well as the Creative State Advisory Board, Creative Victoria. So welcome again, Peter, and please, may I invite you to start your sharing, please. Thank you.
Thank you for that kind introduction. And I'm absolutely delighted to be here virtually. So I'm hoping everyone can see my slides. Great. So look, with my 10 minutes, I'm going to do some rapid fire examples of international case studies, of examples of kind of monetization innovation. This is something very much that I do, but as you heard in the introduction, it's kind of also based in practice. So very quickly, as an introduction to Culture Label. We started that business in 2009. It was one of the absolute pioneers and early players in selling art online, something which lots of people told me was a crazy idea. At that point, people weren't really buying things like art online. The internet, I guess, was a different place. But I guess it gives me experience of taking an idea from absolutely nothing, from zero, with very limited resources, and actually having a situation where, within a year or two, having, several 100,000 people a month, using that site. And there are a few things that sat behind it. One is the power of aggregation. So if you think about all those amazing limited edition artworks that you can buy at galleries around the world, or design objects, whether it's the V&A or the Guggenheim or some of the names that were mentioned, the power of bringing those things together, which sometimes cultural institutions are obviously reluctant to do because they're selling through their own particular channel. So aggregation is a key trend, which, as we know with sites like Amazon and other examples, is really powerful in terms of the web. It also is about curation. So for us, it was about searching out the very kind of best both partners to work with in terms of those cultural institutions and artists and designers, but also the products as well. And that was then about creating a trusted brand. But it was also what I would call a passion brand. So a large percentage, nearly 90% of everything we sold went back to those cultural institutions or artists. So increasingly, consumers are looking and this is great for the cultural sector, to support organizations that have a social purpose. So that's really important. That gives you an advantage over a business that's just, there for profit's sake. And then finally, by creating something that can grow and be scalable, in our case, it was set up as a business, as a creative enterprise. And that was quite deliberate because it allowed us to tap into alternative forms of capital to grow the business, to spend more on marketing, to improve the site, etc. And that's obviously quite challenging often for a not-for-profit cultural organization. So increasingly, I think there are new models arising that allow you to tap into capital. So there's a little bit on Culture Label to get us started. Culture Label is an example of creative entrepreneurship, something that I'm really passionate about. I've written a number of books about it, but day to day, I now work on that as my day job. We sold Culture Label a few years ago on the back of the success of that platform, but I now run something called Remix, and Remix is about spotlighting examples of creative entrepreneurship around the world. So do go and check that out. A lot of the examples that I'm going to talk about today, there's online talks, physical events around examples of creative entrepreneurship. And we've had our own pivot. So obviously conferences have been cancelled. We do them in places like New York or London or Sydney. So we've created a video on demand platform, effectively kind of like a Netflix for creative entrepreneurship stories, sponsored by organizations like Microsoft. What's great about that type of model, it's a combination of sponsored content, which is great for things like cultural institutions that allows you to give stuff for free, but also there's a low-cost subscription model that obviously creates a recurring revenue stream that makes that creative enterprise sustainable as well, alongside online courses and the like. I won't talk so much about the kind of consulting projects because I'll touch on one or two of those in my examples. So first thing I would say is, like, the internet, giving stuff away for free has often been associated with the internet. I know it was one of the kind of questions, how do you compete in a world where things are free? Well, there's a great book by a guy called Nicholas Lovell called The Curve. And that's about saying effectively, as far as I see it, is that free is not a bad thing if it builds a huge community, because his argument is you then use that community to find your super fans. So a couple of really quick examples are something like History Hit. So if you take the space of historical content, the example at the top here is Dan Snow. Dan was previously a BBC historian, did lots of history documentaries. So he had a kind of profile and a community around himself. He realized that the world of broadcast was changing. So he decided he was going to distribute and create content directly himself rather than going through somebody like the BBC. So he used his kind of celebrity and community to do a campaign on Indiegogo. He raised a couple of £100,000 through Kickstarter that allowed him to create the first kind of content. He's now grown that kind of content initially through podcasting to over 3 million listens per month. So it's become a really serious channel for people to get history content. But because he had those 3 million listens per month, it's allowed them to create a secondary business, which is kind of like a Netflix of history. So history on demand TV, which now has over 100,000 paid subscribers. He also does e-commerce. He sells them stuff. He does kind of online book clubs that you pay for access to. They also have gone full circle. They've gone back to kind of live events as well. So that's a great example of where you can turn free into paid if you can find the super fans within those 3 million free views. And then increasingly now we talk about kind of hybrid models. So these things can go the other way. So Dan started online, but ultimately he's also ended up doing live events. But if you take something like Time Out, iconic brand, Time Out is a really good example of understanding your core purpose and then doing it in kind of different ways. So they started with the online space. They have over 240 million, views of their content each month between their online content and also their magazines. But like a lot of media organizations, they had more eyeballs, but never had they had kind of less money. What they did was they realized that Time Out's core purpose is about getting people to kind of explore and understand the best of their city. So they then decided to use that huge online audience and create a physical version of their product, which was a curated market of the best things to do in a city. That started in Portugal, in Lisbon. It now has over 4 million people per year. And it's a great example of a kind of hybrid model where the online goes into the offline, in their case, to kind of monetize alongside the advertising and things they make from online. But it was about understanding the core purpose and then how does that change in an online space. So we've talked about communities. This is a kind of really big part of what we do if you want to succeed in online. So crowdfunding is going to grow massively in the next few years. It's expected to triple by 2025. A great example of this is a guy called Hans Vex. He's a kind of curator. He created a kind of product, which is this kind of mini museum. So it's tiny fragments of articles. He's a curator and a kind of collector, and it's everything from a piece of Steve Jobs' kind of turtleneck to a piece of a kind of lunar module on one of the Apollo missions. And what he did is he used Kickstarter to basically supercharge this business. So he's now shipped over 1 million of these specimens over 150 different subjects. He's got 40,000 customers in 120 different countries because the internet allows him to reach anybody. And he's raised 4.6 million over 5 campaigns. So 5 of these mini museums that he's released with 16,000 plus backers. And what's great about it is that once he'd hooked people into that first product using kind of crowdfunding, he'd also been able to get a lot of repeat backers. So on something like Kickstarter, over a quarter of them are repeat backers. So if you can get people kind of collecting and get your community engaged, they'll keep coming back and back. So that's another example of a totally different business, which is an alternative online museum. So the great thing about crowdfunding is people in huge numbers are supporting things that they're passionate about, but increasingly that's allowing people to create businesses like Hans and Mini Museum. So you've now on the back of that had the rise of crowd equity. So that's people saying, I don't just want a kind of reward in return for my money. I actually want to support you on your business journey and become a shareholder in what you're doing. So a great example of that in the UK is Crowdcube. They've raised over £1 billion already across 13,000 new businesses that have been launched through that particular program or supported through that particular program. And a number of those are now starting to be creative businesses. So for example, many of you might know Secret Cinema, hugely successful entrepreneurial organization that produces immersive cinema productions. So for example, they build the world of the movie. They had over 100,000 people go to Star Wars. Even during COVID, they had over 300,000 people went to their partnership with Netflix to produce Stranger Things in LA. So their business kind of grew through social media. So people would share, Instagram shots or Facebook images of these incredible, sets, such as, the X-Wing fighter here in their kind of production of Star Wars. So they built a huge kind of online following. During lockdown, they started doing online screenings where, people around the world would tune in at the same time to do immersive kind of online screening. But they used that kind of online following to then say, well, be part of our journey as we kind of grow. As we come out of lockdown, there'll be a huge experience boom. I personally would predict. So they've just raised £5 million across nearly 6,000 investors through Crowdcube. But it's been driven by the fact that they've got over 500,000 social media followers. So great way of monetizing that audience. And then I'm sort of starting to run out of time, so I might tap into some of the other examples as part of the Q&A. But I'll perhaps finish on a great example of where a cultural institution has thought really differently about building a community and then monetizing that community. So if I asked anybody in the room, and I know a lot of you are from cultural organizations, who is the most subscribed, museum on the planet on YouTube? I'm sure a lot of you would come out with the examples at the bottom, the Met or the Tate or, MoMA, some of those kind of big brands. Well, actually, the answer is the Field Museum in Chicago, which is absolutely not one of the most visited museums in the world, but it's got this huge online presence because they did something really smart 5 or 6 years ago. And they identified this individual, Emily Graslie. And Emily is a YouTuber and she's a science communicator. So she basically had a show, the Brain Scoop, which she basically, communicated sort of science in interesting ways for a kind of YouTube generation, particularly aimed at kind of young people, teenage audience. And the Field Museum said, look, we don't fully get this space, but we can see that you do. And what if we kind of come together and we kind of combine forces? So they basically employed Emily as their first ever chief curiosity correspondent, brought her into the building and said, look, we've got all these great stories, these collections, spaces, go for your life. We're not going to provide any rules or things that we would normally do in terms of how we operate in the museum. Just go and create amazing content that will share our stories with the world. So she's now got over 500,000 subscribers to kind of Brain Scoop. As you'll see, the Field Museum's only a tiny part of the branding. It's just a little logo in the corner. So very much she is the kind of the front person. On the back of the success, she's now producing programs, documentaries for organizations like PBS. But what's really great is even though she's got the most subscribers, she's also got the highest level of engagement because those audience members are coming back again and again, which is really important. Whereas a lot of the other organizations, they might get the odd kind of big hit, but she's getting people coming back week after week every time she releases the content. And the really great comparison is if you look at the Field Museum's official account, it has just over 6,000 subscribers. But if you get over 500,000 subscribers, 33.7 million views, you're suddenly in the position where you can make money in a serious way through advertising, brand partnerships, but also that online following will translate offline as well. So look, I'll stop there and perhaps pick up on some of the other examples within the Q&A because I'm out of time and I don't want to take time from my fellow panelists.
Thank you, Peter, for that very, very interesting sharing. Sorry, I think we should be able to come and revisit some of the examples that you may not be able to cover later in the Q&A, for sure. But certainly, I think you've covered the kind of very wide range in terms of when we talk about monetizing across not just from creative products to actually event experiences. And I think you touch on some really important point about how really it is to start on, well, even when we go into the digital space to monetize art, we have to go back to the core purpose of why you're doing it, and that will lead them to how you're doing it. So we'll come back again, hopefully later, to look at some of your other examples. Next, I'd like to invite Mr. Syaheed, MSBI, who is the head of artist services at Believe. Believe is one of the world's leading digital music companies, and they have been developing local independent artists and labels in the digital world. I think many of you who are from the music industry definitely are no strangers to Syaheed and Believe. Now, Syaheed started out as a music producer, and since amassed over 18 years of experience in the music industry under his belt, and he has developed expertise in creative talent development, regional strategy, marketing, licensing, and event management. He's also the chairman of the Music Society Singapore, which is a charity organization and which aims to provide, to actually bring about a vibrant and viable Singapore music ecosystem that would improve the lives of Singapore communities. So over to you, Syaheed.
Thank you very much, Eng Teo. Good morning to everyone and my fellow panelists and all the attendees over there. Let me start my little presentation over here. This morning, I wanted to kind of cover a couple of things, and I really want to spend a bit of time in this 10 minutes to dive into, maybe an introduction to belief. I think, Teong is being very polite to say that everybody knows quite a bit about belief and about what we do, but so much of what we do is behind the scenes. So I thought it might be actually very interesting or important to share exactly what we do behind the scenes, because we are really a company that's birthed as a digital native company, birthed at the inception of when iTunes was formed and music was just starting to kind of benefit from a monetized digital platform. And then, so I'll spend the first 5 minutes around that. And then in the second half of my presentation, I really want to kind of dial back some fundamentals around value and ways of monetizing so that, I think it gives you a bit of a framework to be able to go forward. So with that, here we go. So who are we, what we do, I believe. Really, as Teong mentioned earlier, we're really all about local artists and labels, providing them with digital-first solutions that respect what level of development they are at, whether they're fresh and new, or they are a company that actually has a robust production team and really knows how to create content. We cover the full spectrum. And our job is really to kind of provide them with the right solutions, access to market, distribution, so that they are then able to monetize that content that they create. And starting in 2005, we've emerged to become one of the world's leading digital music companies. It's really all about the independent artists, independent labels, and giving them that opportunity and might and power. And why have we kind of grown the way that we've grown? What we see is that the music market since 2000 has been changing profoundly, and it keeps on changing. And what we did was we built this kind of new model for the new world, the digital artist market, right? And so by kind of developing what we do to be kind of uniquely positioned and adapted to take advantage of that transformation has really helped us really move forward. So what do I mean by that? So we've obviously seen the rapid growth of streaming. We've seen the rise of independent artists, and it's the simple fact that we're part of this mega trend where the music market is moving extremely into the digital era. Digital music means digital artist development, which means that they kind of live natively again within the digital environment. And these digital artists, this digital native artists, also require a completely new model, which we provide compared to even the incumbents that are. And to kind of give you a scale of where things are at, by 2030, we expect that 90% of all the recorded music revenues in the world would actually be digital. So it's kind of counterintuitive to some of the pain points we feel today, which is like, the internet, digital seems to be free. Actually, we see that the trend is moving in that direction, and 90% of the revenues are going to be digital. So how we serve and what really was kind of like, how is it that we're building this digital native company and what's really important? And I think this is important for all organizations to think about it from this perspective, which is what's fundamental to our organization is that it's got a deep technology DNA. It's very much around how do we build scalability? How do we build, automation? How do we leverage what is actually, counteracting a lot of the challenges that we have today? How do we build technology to overcome that? And with technology, I think there's also a very simple data-driven DNA that we actually provide underlying to that, because you're starting to get a lot of data points around what exactly will work. I think the internet is very, very brutal in the form that they would tell you very quickly what they like and what they don't like. And you have empirical data to see that. And sometimes we don't like that data. Sometimes it takes a longer time for things to kind of turn around. But the fact is that we have that data and we need to use it. So we built an organization that knows how to understand, interpret, and leverage that data-driven model. And again, digital music DNA. We're still a music company at heart. We still have, local experts, people passionate like myself, 18 years in the music industry, can't imagine it. And we kind of assembled that team of expertise and build up that team expertise. We actually, just prior to this call, we spent a whole morning doing a mindset shift around, how can we continually learn, because the market, the internet is continuously changing and throwing us new challenges all the time. So who do we serve? The who do we serve is we're looking at, artists that are completely brand new, DIY, Brit Room, maybe students, all the way to top established artists that are generating millions and billions of stream. And we actually develop models to kind of serve each of those. And if you look at that, our foundation actually is to tackle one of the core value propositions of what Peter was saying earlier, which is distribution, which is aggregation. We're helping actually empower these artists, these creators, by aggregating and pushing it onto platforms where they can monetize. And since then, we've actually built additional services on top of that, so that they can get access to financing, can get marketing services, and even get complex execution support as well. So to kind of go back to some of the framework that I wanted to talk about, which is I wanted all of you to kind of take it from us, the music industry, because we've been here before in 1999, when it didn't take a pandemic. It took a peer-to-peer file sharing company called Napster to completely obliterate and destroy the physical revenues that came from music. It was awful, right? And the industry was just, tried all forms and tactics to kind of, including especially legal ways, to protect their position, because, they were sitting in this cash cow, and this internet was like freeze, taking away all the value. But I think in and around 2004, 2005, it shifted. And it shifted for a few reasons. It shifted because tech companies actually started to figure it out. They started to lead the way. They figured out how to kind of bring back and unlock value. And they recognize that there's an opportunity and there's a willingness actually for people to pay. And so we've been on this path of growth. And here's the data from until 2017, which this is the US numbers, which is we're up to about 6 billion there, but it has since doubled. In 2020, we're at 12.2 billion just in the US alone. And in fact, Asia Pacific is by far the fastest growing territory. So we've got a lot to catch up. We actually think that Asia Pacific is going to be surpassing the US market as a whole by 2030. So fundamentals around value, I think is really important, because I think the ways in which you unlock monetization really depends on these fundamentals, so I kind of simplified it and looked at intrinsic value and economic value. And I think a lot of the monetizing conversation is around the economic value. But I think intrinsic value is integral to arts heritage and what we produce, because there is a notion that, there is an art for art's sake. Like, we need to create art and be able to express and do it anyway. And there's also cultural capital. So it's kind of like, this is like the national voice, the identity of a person. And these are intrinsic values that are probably very hard to put a number on it, to monetize it, but very important to nurture and to invest in. But what about economic value? And I think economic value is again, oversimplification, looking at three things, which is utility. How can I practically use this? How can I use this for things that I want? An example of utility in this day and age is as simple as using a music that I've composed or recorded in a personal family home video, or even a personal video on TikTok, for example. And those are licensed content that generates and monetizes for the content creators on those user-generated content. Unique experiences is another one. Unique experiences, I think, if I think we haven't nailed this piece, especially in digital for the most part. A lot of what we're doing right now is looking at, hey, we've had this physical, cultural experience. And, with physical, there's a high level of barrier of entry because, whether it's a festival like a Rio Carnival or a monument site like the World Colosseum or India's Taj Mahal, you have to be physically there. There's a natural limitation that you can protect and unlock value because you can, pay for it through tourism and people coming in. But in the digital world, how do you compensate for that? How do you create unique experiences that you can actually unlock and monetize? And I think the gaming industry is one that are leading the way on this point. The fact that they are creating metaverse and creating value within that metaverse, where people are creating digital goods and art pieces within that environment. And then last but not least, personal value. And personal value for me, quite simply, is all around, tying things to your personal memory, transporting you back to a particular place in time. And we as an individual actually adds a lot of, value to that as well, because it embodies so much of our person, our identity, and it's an immediate reflection and aspiration of oneself. So we want to buy, that new song and CD or whatnot. And to kind of I'm near the end, I know I'm running out of time, but so looking at ways of monetizing and Peter laid out a lot of really great examples. And I think this is kind of the blown out view of all the tactics that he spoke about. Much of the physical world right now, we've been very focused on transactional and patronage models. What do we mean by transactional? One-time exchange purchase. So things like commission work, maybe sponsorship of events, purchase of digital goods, or even cohort-based learning or experiences. These are all transactional because it's one time, and much of the physical works in that way. And it kind of creates kind of like this challenge of how do we chase this income to come in again. Patronage is the second thing that we've always done, which is looking at how can we get donations from the public, out of the goodness of your heart, please give us some money so we can do these things. How can we get money from government to kind of pay for the works that we want to create. And I think a lot of intrinsic value creators really kind of milk this part of it, and they have to probably. But looking at the digital side, we've actually invented a lot of newer models, which is around the recurring model, the subscription models. And there's a couple of different kinds of recurring models, which are ad supported or subscription based models by whether internal or external platforms. External platforms would be things like Spotify or Apple or YouTube or Twitch in the music world, or Netflix or Disney Plus, for example. But then there's also the own platform, right? So you have, creators that are actually creating interesting artworks, building communities, investing time in building their communities and knowing how to monetize those super fans. And so they have, subscription platforms like Patreon, where they have people coming in and supporting the long-term creation of their work. And then last, which is very, very abstract, I think at the moment, which is also very new, a lot of creators are actually looking at monetizing that audience and that community in a form of ownership. And by ownership, I mean rather than do a sponsorship, they say, hey, Pizza Hut, you can sponsor my event. It's they're going and say, hey, let's create something where it's a collaboration piece. And I know a lot of graphic artists, digital artists are doing this with known brands, where they're creating custom kind of capsule projects, and so they're kind of owning that part of it, and so they're leveraging that audience. So I think these are all tactics and ways of monetizing that you can kind of put together according to how passionate it is, that audience. And I'll close with this. And I'm very passionate about this, and many of you, I think, within industry probably has seen me harp about this quite a lot. Which is, I think there's an overwhelming trend that we need to recognize on the growing popularity of local artists in local markets. It's so important. It's so important if you look at what we are experiencing now, where borders are closed artificially. The entertainment art form, the content production, a lot of that needs to come from local artists. So we need to continue to invest in that local artists, and see that there's value in local artists for local markets. And just by closing the borders, we've seen local consumption explode, digital has also kind of like ramped that up and see that local music consumption is also growing on digital platforms. And so what's the next step is, how do we switch from a Singapore perspective? How do we switch from a consumer base economy to one that actually we create and produce artworks that we can then share and export into the world? So a lot of it is, foreign creations that are generating value here in Singapore, which is great, right? So and ask ourselves really, what drives culture today? Who is it? Because it might be actually something that we kind of tend to overlook. So I'll close with that. And I saw some of the questions that are coming in, and I'd love to kind of dig into that as well. So thank you again very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Syaheed, for that sharing, that showing us how the music industry globally has evolved over time. And in fact, the disruption, the digital disruption came into the music industry much earlier. When the slide came on I think it was slide 10, when he showed the kind of the digital music industry, the digital consumption in the music industry, and he indicated the launch of Napster. I kind of brought a smile to my face. I was just wondering, had this been has this been actually physical session, I would be so tempted to do a straw poll and ask how many of you here, the 200 over participants here today, have actually used Napster. And used Napster at the time when it was before it was kind of now as a business as legalized, right? And because it was deemed that because of the whole IPR issue, and then that this one has since come all the way until now, right? So I thought some really interesting idea that we will definitely kind of revisit when we talk about this whole local global. Yes, before I introduce the next speaker, I just want to say that to urge all and to encourage all of you here to keep posting your question in the Q&A box, and we know that some of you have already pre-sent some of your questions to us. We thank you for that, and do keep the question coming, because we do cater quite a good length of time of more than about 40 minutes for Q&A. Do come in, do keep the question coming in. Next, almost then we have the last speaker for the panel. I'm most tempted not to having to introduce him, because many of us would have know what SISTIC is about. We have used the services to purchase tickets or events to many of our favorite performances and art events. But nonetheless, I'd like to next introduce Mr. Joe Au. Joe, of course, is the Chief Executive Officer of SISTIC.com Private Limited, where he oversees the ticketing experience in today's age of data and digital experiences. Joe has a great vision. He wants to change the way consumers discover and consume sports, arts, culture, and entertainment activities. As you know, he was previously with Accenture Singapore and WPP, where he was involved in technology, consulting, and digital transformation. And he has also held many leadership positions in those companies that he worked in. So next, over to you, Joe.
Thank you, Teong. Morning, everyone. Okay, I'll just quickly share some of the data and insights for arts and culture consumption in Singapore, especially on digital products, right? So I think as Teong shared earlier on, the pandemic has really shifted behaviors and accelerated digital consumptions of arts and culture products. Since May 2020 last year, with the introduction of SISTIC Live, our virtual event and live stream platform, we've also seen a quick adoption for arts and culture clients that we have. And the consumption of those digital products is being produced and released on those platforms by our patrons, right? I won't go into the details of this. I think the slides will be shared later on as well. But if we look at the consumption before the pandemic, there is actually a slight difference in the makeup of our arts as well as our culture patrons, right? I mean, look across both of the categories, they're fairly similar, largely citizens and residents with a very small percentage of non-locals. But when we look at the consumption after or during the pandemic, while obviously the total real number of attendance has decreased, there was actually an increase in consumption by the citizens, right? And for cultural attendance, it was probably more driven by footfall into the museums, into the cultural institutions, by our local tourism and rediscover campaigns by STB. Now, and when we look at all of the arts and culture patrons that we have in 2019, 40% of them bought arts events from us, right? And these are physical arts events. But out of which 18% of them actually adopted digital events since last year, right? And we could actually see that majority of them did buy something that is paid, even though free events were available. And then if we look at the other side, where these are patrons who bought cultural events from us in 2019, a smaller number, about 22% of them bought something that's digital, right? But if you look at the overall scheme and overall details, they are still paying for paid stuff versus just going for the free stuff. So I think this gives us encouragement that if the quality of the work is good, people would pay for them, right? So it's not just about the free things because of digital. And then we took a deeper dive, right, into the patrons who attended or purchased digital products from us. We can clearly see that when it's digital, we are able to reach out to a new set of audience. It helped with new patrons acquisitions, especially in reaching out to non-locals. Right, 59% for citizens and residents who purchase digital products from us were brand new. That means they have never bought anything from us before. Right, and if you look at non-locals, 95% of them were brand new. Right, so very clearly, digital will allow you to acquire more patrons, newer set of patrons, especially if you want to go into the region or international. But when we look at, of course, what are popular among the digital products that was purchased, again, doesn't come as a big surprise. We're looking at musicals, films, concerts, theaters, and in some degrees, comedy products are also very popular, right? A lot of these figures come from our annual patron survey that we do. And in this case, when we did it in 2021, the sample size was about 1,400, right? Now, but when it comes to monetization, I think the different characteristics between a physical event versus a digital event also have to be considered, right? Because if you look at a physical event, you are dealing with limited capacity, you're dealing with geographic limitations, there are different tiers and views because of the stage and all of that, right? So typically your monetization option is very specific. It's to pay by the category, pay by the section, pay by the view. There will be patrons who will be selecting certain seats because of the audio capacity. There are certain seats that will be certain seats because of the visual considerations. But when we go into digital, suddenly some of those limitations disappears, right? Because digital means I can always have the best seat in the house. There is, technically speaking, unlimited capacity, and technically speaking, you have unlimited time, right? Because you're not bounded by when it starts and when it ends, unless it's a live stream. And because of that, then suddenly the monetization option have also changed, right? So you could do pay as you wish. There could be donation functionality. As I'm watching this video, I could be tipping or donating. I could choose to pay per view. I can have an all access pass, subscription-based type of model. And I think even the consumer purchase behavior have also changed quite drastically, because there's little sense of scarcity. There is no rush to buy, because there's no need to rush to make sure that you can always get the seats that you want, the category that you want. So that has also influenced very largely consumer behavior. So our stats have actually shown that almost 30 to 50% of purchases for a digital event could happen at the very last 24 hours. Right? So unlike your physical setup, you typically would have sold majority of your sales by the time. I mean, in a digital event, it's actually nerve-wracking because up to 50% of your sales could happen only in the last 24 hours, right? Because there's no scarcity. There's no concept of scarcity. People are buying because I know I will be able to make it for the event. I know my schedule allows me to do it. I know my kids are, whatever, or my personal commitment is sorted. So I can attend the event. I'm buying it and and one other thing that I also want to add is physical does have some other things that will be different from digital. In this case, is the whole concept of dynamic pricing, right? I do think that dynamic pricing will be a lot more applicable to the physical front moving forward, but maybe less impact on the digital types of events. Right? So this is definitely something that we have to explore for a monetization option. Now, then when we look at the different types of monetization options that's available, but maybe this is still new to a lot of the customers that we are working with. Fixed price, pay as you wish, generally are still the most common charging model for digital events at the moment. And our stats actually do show that in general, if you opt a pay as you wish model, you could have a higher propensity to provide a higher yield, right? Because actually relatively fewer patrons would choose the lower price because there is a perceived value of what you're selling. So even though you do offer them a lower price, majority of them actually do not pick the lower price. They could potentially pick whatever is priced right or more, right? So your yield could potentially be higher versus if you do a fixed price. Right. So I think that's just some insights that I think could be useful if you're thinking about, selecting whether fixed price or pay as you wish for your digital products. And we've also looked at in terms of pricing, right? Look across all the digital products that we have at the moment to give you a sense of, where are all the products being priced at currently, right? Majority of them are in the less than $20 category. And while the $20 to $40 is also another viable category that we can look at. I think what is also interesting is while this is all the events that we have, pricing usually is what we work with the event organizers. So this is basically what the event organizers are pricing the products, right? But at the same time, we have also done our survey with our patrons to also try to understand what would they pay for the different genre. And then we measure that against the actual event that happened, the different actual genre events that happened, and see whether what they say they will pay versus what they actually paid, is there a big discrepancy? So this is basically what this second chart is supposed to show us. Now, largely the sweet spot is around below $20, with some categories like concerts, musicals, and theaters potentially going to $30 in this case. But we can also see some discrepancies, right? So like, for example, if you look at family entertainment, what actually happened is actually a fair bit of people actually paid up to $20. Comedy in this case, because of a well-known act that came in, we actually sold way higher than what people say they will pay, right? So I think what this infer is that if you got good quality IPs, artists, performances, you could still command a higher price. Right, it's really your perceived value versus what the patrons will pay. I think over time, as more of these digital products come online, as we sell more of this, consumer behaviors will also shift, and then you also get a better idea of what will work and what will not work. Now, I will quickly end with 4 case studies, namely Singapore Writers Festival, Singapore Art Weeks, shows that digital run, Esplanade run for digital shows, as well as Singapore International Festival of the Arts. Now, before I share the rest of the stuff, we're not going to share sensitive information about volume of tickets, sales, and all of that. But I think what I want to do is really share some other insights about each of these cases that hopefully could be useful for the audience here. When we look at Singapore Art Weeks, for example, it's a free event, free access, but we require people to register. So this is digital. This is a pure digital. I think it was a symposium. It was a 3 + 14 days extension, 8 live stream that eventually became on demand. We gathered about 2,000 registration, right? So even though it was free, we could gather registration data. And for Esplanade, they did about close to 50 to 60 digital shows since May of last year. Mainly the monetization mechanics were pay as you wish, pay-per-view, average ticket price was about $12. What I want to call out is for 3 shows that were did in June, 52% of the viewers were brand new, right? That means these were never customers or patrons that have bought anything from Esplanade before. 52% of them, when they viewed the digital shows, they were brand new. And of that percentage, 11% of them actually subscribed to receive more information, right? So increasing your marketing base that you have to work with. The other one will be SWF Writer Festival. It was a pretty large scale event from a digital standpoint. In the 10 days, more than 100 live stream sessions was running concurrently. And then shortly after that, they converted 80 of those videos into on-demand. I think what was interesting was that 98%, a huge overwhelming number of people who purchased Access Pass to this event, bought it for the live stream sessions. And when we converted to the VOD, it only contributed about 2% of the sales, right? So there is a very clear preference by at least this festival in terms of the patrons that people will prefer the live version of that same video versus VOD, right? And in terms of a festival, obviously, it was able to reach about 12 different countries. And then when we look at SIFA, it was SIFA was, I think, also was caught in the middle of the phase 2 heightened alert. So a lot of physical shows and performances were also converted to digital. So in the midst of that, right? It was a 45-day long festival, and then there was a 14-day extension. In total, about 23 on-demand videos was put up for subscription and for purchase. It has two types of pass. You have a one all-access pass, which gains you access to 17 titles. And then you can also pay to watch per individual titles, right? And again, this was also a bit, I would say a bit surprising, was that 78%, majority of the sales came from individual videos versus, you know, the higher valued item of the all access pass, right? And when we look at the overall festival ticketing, 43% of all purchases were for the digital content. Right, so it was an event that was a hybrid model. They were physical and there was a digital. 43% of them contributed from digital, and it was able to reach out to more than 30 countries in the region as well as globally. Right, so it clearly shows the reach of digital products. Now, so I'll end up with a key takeaway slide. Right, really a higher digital acceptance, even if the physical experience is irreplaceable, and digital doesn't have to be free. Right, we have clear stats to show that patrons will pay for quality digital products. And the digital products could also definitely allow you to acquire new audiences. Majority of them are younger, as well as regional reach. And then the different characteristics of physical versus digital really does affect your consideration of how you want to monetize. So do make sure you consider those well. All right, so with that, I end the sharing. Teong, back to you.
Yep. Thanks, Joe. Thanks so much for that for sharing, and indeed, what's very clear that as with the data as well as examples that you've given us, clearly indicated as kind of very aptly summarized in your last major learning point, which is that when we talk about monetizing the arts, right? When between physical and digital, there is definitely a whole different set of considerations, and in fact, including kind of support structure that needs to make that happen. Of course, the physical one, we have been doing it for many years. We know how, and now in the digital realm, how do we then rethink some of those kind of challenges as we move forward? Thanks all for the three panelists for your sharing. Let's get into the kind of question and answer. Actually, thanks to the participant, please keep the question coming. I've seen quite a number, and I will just kind of try to kind of combine it with some of the questions that you have earlier set in. And I think they have been touched by all the three panelists to some kind of different extent, and in a kind of very specific areas. And in terms of when we talk about monetizing the arts, I would say really the elephant in the room that many people are still concerned with is, firstly, would actually people pay for it, right? There was a lot of skepticism because previously content is really largely kind of free. And I think tying to the question, which is I think what is raised by Ken, which in the Q&A box, is that even if people are willing to pay for it, how much are you willing to pay for it? And of course, in some of the sharings by the panelists, you already indicated that there is going to be a difference. But I think the tying to that question is about then whether they say whether there's what's all the consideration, whether there's a science to it in terms of how we determine the kind of tiering, and in fact, what would be something that people are prepared to pay for. So may I kind of quickly invite maybe from Peter again to kind of see whether you and Syaheed and Joe have further comments on this particular point.
Yeah, okay, I'll go first. Yeah, so look, the first thing to say is I think, as all the panelists have mentioned, is people are absolutely paying for this stuff anyway. So for me, there's absolutely no question. And look, one of the biggest proof points, and these are people that probably measure statistics around this more than anybody else, is just the arrival of big tech in this space. If nothing else, tells you there's money to be made. If you want to be really outright commercial about it. So if you look at Airbnb experiences, if you look at Amazon Explore, so they're providing both offline experiences in the case of Airbnb, but also online. And the Airbnb experiences business, which launched a few years ago, in its first year grew 25 times faster than the Airbnb rentals experience. And we used to talk about Airbnb as, is it like the biggest hotel in the world if you aggregate all of those different kind of rooms together? Well, I'd argue it's already the biggest museum or cultural institution in the world, because millions of people are buying experiences physically and digitally through that platform. And certainly if you look at like a business like Amazon, that's now going down the same path with Amazon Explore, they don't do anything unless they've measured it to death, and people are prepared to pay for that content. And obviously in their case, so they do a lot of one-to-one online experiences. It's still an experiment. It's in kind of pilot mode, but you can go to the streets of Tokyo and do a cultural tour or a street art tour or whatever it might be. But of course, in their case, they can also link it to commerce. So you can interact with a local trader and you can buy, artisan products. So look, I would say this is happening already, and actually, where is big tech a collaborator? Where is it a competitor? So if you look at Airbnb, organisations like the MCA in Australia or the Sydney Opera House, Louvre in France, have all partnered with Airbnb. So they're working together to sell their experiences through that platform, because what they bring is huge amounts of customers. Similar example is Coursera. So in the online learning space, Coursera has over 70 million users, customers each year. MoMA in the US have launched over 10 online learning courses through that platform. Now, you can do the course for free, but at the end of it, you can buy your certificate or you can become a subscriber to the platform to access content. Now, they've had over 1 million people do a course, a MoMA course on Coursera. And it only takes a very small percentage of those to buy the certificate or to buy the premium content for them to obviously generate a pretty significant revenue with those kinds of numbers. So we've had the director of learning at MoMA has been talking on Remix Academy recently about that experience. And for them, they've actually repurposed a lot of content that would have been free content as well, that they've released through, say, their exhibitions department. Of course, they've had to develop, dedicated content. They've got to engage with those users on a regular basis, and it is about that recurring kind of activity. But it's fascinating. You look at Coursera; they're pretty much the only cultural institution on there. So I'd be asking the question: There's again, people are paying for that stuff. They're buying business courses or whatever else through Coursera. Online learning, as we all know, has had a huge boom during the pandemic. Why aren't more organisations on there? And then the final thing, maybe I'd say in terms of people sort of paying for content is. You've got to do something. You've got to give people a reason to pay for it. So I think we talked, about things like, unique content creation. Like one of the examples that I'll just really briefly sort of share my screen. I didn't get around to talk about it, but I think it's such a good example of this is Darkfield. So this is a small UK creative company. And what Darkfield did was they basically used to do shows in shipping containers that sort of traveled the world, and they're audio-based shows. So they basically take people on a kind of journey. So one of the shipping containers inside it's an airplane, and the other one's a seance. So these shows are physical shows where people go in and they have an audio-based story experience. And then during lockdown, of course, they couldn't tour, they couldn't do those short shows. So what they did is they completely reinvented the experience for a home user, rather than just slavishly kind of replicating what they did as a physical experience. So they set the show in a kitchen. They worked out that wherever you are in the world, there are certain things that are the same in everybody's kitchen. You might have a kettle or a toaster or a table. So according to where they placed you as an audience member in the room, for example, they would ask you to put a glass of water on the table next to you, and they use binaural audio. So you really have this directional audio experience where, for example, one of the scenes is where there is a stranger in the room and you really believe there might be somebody stood behind you, kind of breathing from, the quality of the audio experience. And then at a certain point in the scene, the water is knocked off the table. And I was almost sort of, because you've got your eyes closed, I was almost opening my eyes to kind of get clean up the water. It was that kind of compelling. But something like that, which is crafted for, a digital hybrid environment, for me is really interesting. In their case, they've sold 250,000 tickets to their physical experience all around the world. This digital experience has won awards at Tribeca. They've already sold 25,000 tickets. So there's a real business there, for me. But they still take some of the elements of the real thing. So wherever you are in the world, you tune in at a certain time. So there's a sense of a kind of communal experience as well. So, I'll maybe stop there and let some of the other panelists kind of jump in.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. I think certainly it all still comes down to the kind of quality of experiences, isn't it? And thanks for the example, which also perhaps have indirectly answered one of the questions that was sent in earlier, whether they have seen certain examples of really real kind of successful digital kind of experience. But Syaheed, over to you. What do you think from the music industry, the kind of pricing? I think the whole thing about monetizing and pricing, and in your sharing earlier, you already actually kind of give us a sense that in order to move into the space, that you need a whole big infrastructure and support system kind of behind it, the kind of technology, the kind of data that one can have, because I think you mentioned that the internet world is extremely brutal in terms of feedback. And if they don't like it, they just kind of turn off immediately. So I think the music industry sort of have a different whole set of concerns when it comes to the kind of how do you then tier at the kind of make it that create the right value and attract the patrons and the buyers. Yeah.
Well, the way I think we should think about it is that there is, when we have to accept to a certain degree that there is a lot of irrationality when it comes to price in the first place, especially in the digital realm, because you've got now NFTs going for 69 million, which, people are like, what's going on? To something that could be probably Googled and found for free. And like, why is that value attached there and why that price attached there? So I think depending on the state of your access and community, this is one of the key determinants around price, right? And so the way I look at it is that if you are someone that doesn't have a ready to go community, you haven't built that up, or you're just starting out, you need to lean into aggregator platforms, and let the aggregator platform sometimes determine the price, at least initially, and for you to kind of subsidize that community building, which then you can go like, okay, what then is this engaged community willing to pay for? And you can, and that's where you test. And so it's almost looking at the history of internet and our experiments, right? Like, let's put it up for free. Let's kind of build our MySpace pages, at least for the music space, right? Let's build our MySpace pages, and in the start, how many friends or followers can we like? And then, okay, take a page out of Radiohead. Let's do pay as you wish. You determine the price. Folks, fans, what do you want to pay for it? And then that is really where the experimentation needs to happen. So, I mean, the simple advice is, when the price is not clear, just lean into those aggregator platforms. Like Peter again was saying, Airbnb experience is not going. Airbnb is figuring out how to monetize the small operators, and at the same time, in exchange of giving them access to to spend on marketing and so forth. So, I mean, our business has been built around creating, solutions for that. But for the creators, the artists, companies themselves, because we're not content creators, we don't produce any content. So to make it clear, so we have to build that infrastructure to support the creators. But from a creator's perspective, I think it boils down to how consistent can your content be? How can you, organize that content, what you are willing to kind of release for free in a bite-sized model to attract and upsell it into a more deeper, more meaningful experience. So you were in control of that. So I think that's how you tackle the pricing question.
Indeed. Yeah. Because it's kind of evolving, right? And in fact, as you say, sometimes as individuals, you don't have that kind of sense and data, and you got to lean on those kind of aggregated platform. And also, in some way, market itself will also eventually kind of set in at based on the demand and supply. Then, Joe, you mentioned that there was a sweet spot, right, of $20, which also kind of back to the data I shared earlier, that from our survey, that 1 in 4 were prepared to just pay about $20 or more out of the several thousands of people that we have asked. So what's your take on that? Yeah.
I think the data that we have versus what is actually happening, I think that is actually, I would say, quite true. That means between $10 to $20 is probably what would be most consumers will be willing to pay. But I think, like I said again, there have been cases where, better quality or better perceived quality performances, artists, performers were able to command a higher price. And in some cases, because it's a digital experience, they try to put in a physical component of that, right? Whether it is something that's interactive that goes with the performance, whether it is, bundling F&B options, that be delivered in time for the performance, for example. So there are ways to potentially work with some of this cross-selling to, increase the overall basket size.
Right.
So that you have a little bit more margin that you can work with and things like that. It adds the whole experience, right? Because you do want to find ways to really replicate a bit of that physical experience in your home. Or you could then what else you could add to that?
Correct. Adding to the experience, right? Sorry.
Just to jump in really quickly, I think it's both, isn't it? So if you look at crowdfunding again, there's been a lot of analysis of the most successful crowdfunding campaigns, and this pattern repeats and repeats again. So I've been looking at some in the cultural sector recently. But if you take like a really kind of classic one, there's one called Double Fine Adventure, which actually features in the Superfans book. So, this was an adventure game. So, from the kind of games part of the creative industry, when they analysed that campaign, which raised millions and millions through Kickstarter, one of the most successful campaigns that really launched kind of Kickstarter into the popular consciousness, large numbers of people were at that kind of $20 end of the market. That was the community aspect where people could easily access the content as a digital download. But as much money was made from the high reward items at the other end of the campaign, several $1,000s for, a dinner with the creators or, limited edition artwork from the game. So the super fans made the campaign happen because they were the people that were sharing it in large numbers. They were the people that were giving it credibility, getting it up the kind of the Kickstarter rankings, getting out into the digital world more broadly. But the not the super fans, the sort of freeloaders almost, the people that were paying the kind of the low amounts or were just simply sort of sharing the campaign. But it was the super fans that were paying for as much of it, or if not more of it in some cases, than those people at the kind of the low amounts. But it just comes back to the end of the day. If you can build that community, you can take people on a journey. And a great example of, if you've got if you want a really practical kind of cultural example here, the other example I was going to give, and I'll just sort of share my screen quickly one more time, because it might put it in a kind of cultural institution context. So, and this shows you how much this world is changing. So if you take an area like history of computers and technology, the 4 biggest museums in the world that have about 2 million viewers between them are like ACME, the Australian Centre for the Moving Image, the Computer History Museum in Palo Alto in the middle of Silicon Valley. You'd expect them to have one. Bletchley Park, which is the National Museum of Computing in the UK, which is where the Enigma machine and World War II was invented, or the National Video Game Museum Sheffield. So I just picked out kind of 4 and said, right, you would think with 2 million plus kind of visitors, they've got a pretty big community around what they do. But if you add up their subscribers on YouTube, a bit like kind of Emily Grassley, it's 117,000. Yet you take this guy, Neil Thomas, who is a YouTuber who talks about the history of technology and video games. He's got 136,000 subscribers, but again, very much more engaged. So he's getting 45,000 views per video, as opposed to kind of 9,000 views, for the various kind of museums. Now, the reason I mention this in terms of pricing is he's been through this process of saying, well, I've built up this community. And of course, he makes money through advertising, brand partnerships, e-commerce, the usual things that you might want to monetize through a platform like YouTube. But he's also been using that community to then do Kickstarters and also Patreon campaigns. So we've had the European director of Patreon talk on Remix a couple of weeks ago about this. And we've also had kind of Kickstarter talk about the same pattern. So his Kickstarter campaign, which was to produce a book around the history of computing with some of the pioneers in that world. He had 2,000 backers, pledged £66,000 to make that kind of book a reality. But he had exactly the same pattern as that multi-million-dollar kind of game campaign, where the people who just bought a digital download of the book or just a physical book copy, which were the kind of lowest price tiers, equaled the same amount as the people that were buying the higher price tiers, where he was giving them slightly more rewards, signed books, etc. So again, it was that brilliant balance between you need the community, but you also need to find your super fans. And because he's highly engaged on a platform like YouTube, he's obviously responding to every comment. He's so deeply rooted in his community and what they want, to a level that I would argue that as successful as these other institutions are as physical venues, they're just not in the same game in the digital space. And they're amazing kind of institutions, but they don't have that level of kind of expertise or community at a digital level. But increasingly, it then flicks back to offline. Like the Time Out example is a great one. If you get that digital engagement, you can then get 300,000 people a month or 4 million people a year to your market, because you've got these hybrid models. So you just can't ignore the digital space and succeed, I would argue, in the physical space now. Otherwise, you'll just keep talking to the same people.
Right. Peter, great example there. The kind of when we talk about pricing tiering, of course, it's not kind of monolithic, just one tier, and it's kind of having to how you adjust the different kind of experiences that you offer to your kind of your supporter and your patrons. I want to kind of come back to the point that Syaheed mentioned in passing just now, that when we talked about, of course, monetizing, so far we've been talking about the actual, there's a real product kind of being in the digital realm, right? A live stream or a video on demand, or when I think when Peter founded the culturelabel.com, they was actually selling real products, but selling it through an online platform. But just now you mentioned this NFT, right? The non-fungible token thing that has kind of completely taken many people by surprise. With staggering, I think very much hyped up. And in fact, in the question submitted, a lot of people are saying that this so-called this aspect of digitalization to the NFT, how real is it? How do you even place it? I mean, where do we go from there? Is it something that is just going to be a fad, but it's something that's seriously going to hit us maybe 30, 40, 50 years down the road? Maybe I just, since Syaheed brought this up, maybe you want to just give a very quick take on it. Then maybe Joe, you can come in as well, and Peter. Yeah, Syaheed.
Sure. So yeah, it's going to be a very hot take, I would say, because it's as you said, it's completely new, taken everybody outside of the tech community, I think, by surprise. I think we have to acknowledge that. But I think in NFTs, or the birth of NFTs are exactly proof of everything that we think couldn't happen, which is that there is value that can be created within the digital realm. And NFTs is a tool, a way in which we can start to create scarcity or digital scarcity within the digital realm. And this is for me the kind of like the landmark, kind of like tentpole moment. That's really what NFT is all about. What it can do in the future, I think there's still a ton of experimentation happening. And we're only at the tip of the iceberg at this moment. But I don't think it's a fad. It's here to stay. It's here to evolve. It's here to kind of almost. I think there was a useful analogy that I've come across to kind of explain NFTs to people, which is NFT is like a deed to a house. So it's not necessarily the asset itself, right? It actually explains or makes it very clear who actually has the ownership of that house. And that is encrypted on the blockchain, and people can verify it very
sorry,
clearly.
I don't mean to interrupt, but is the house even real? I mean, if I own the deed to a house, so
I mean, I would argue that the house is real in this case, right? But but you could have multiple copies of the same house.
So yes and no. So think about the experimentations that's been happening. So NFTs are fairly new, but if we look at again the metaverse that has been created within the gaming and industry, and how there are people willing to mortgage the actual house to buy digital goods to give them some kind of added advantage within the gaming experience, whether it's, I don't know, I'm not so much of a gamer, so whether it's a sword, a gun, or some even clothes, whether you're on Fortnite or even a dance, right? And things like that are happening. I think the NBA are also looking at it as well. They have clips that have been available on YouTube and online and on their channels, but they've converted that to NFTs and auctioned it off and generated 300,000 USD in revenues just from it. So is it real? I think it's absolutely real. The analogy to that is almost like, is the value of collecting baseball cards or football cards or stickers real? It is real because we do it. We are the ones who associate value to it, and the value is associated is exchanged when someone else also recognize that value to it. So it's absolutely real. And NFT gives you the ability to verify if you actually had that original. So if it actually enables that exchange and adds value to the exchange. So again, it's a combination of utility, giving ownership history, giving you access to about future value, and I think and to some extent also allowing the ability for you to have some liquidity in terms of that exchange, because it lives on the within the crypto world.
Right. Before I ask Peter maybe whether he has a point to add, rising from this, this discussion on NFT, actually it leads naturally to the whole issue, and you already just now even Joe, you kind of added on, right? There is a kind of multiple copy and also, and we actually have a whole set of questions that came in, and when we talk about this whole digitalization, putting things online, whether it's free or for paid kind of content, a lot of concerns and surround the whole issue of intellectual property rights, and it seems like kind of what we have under the current regime of IPR doesn't seem quite adequate for us to handle many of the issues that have cropped up. Time is very short, but just maybe like to invite, maybe starting with Peter, that what is, can you just give some very quick pointers of what you have encountered and what's your take on this, how this IPR and whether that moving forward is something that we really seriously need to look at when we talk about digitalization and monetizing the arts. Yeah, Peter.
Yeah, and it's probably a related answer to sort of finishing up on NFTs. And look, I also agree with everything the panelists have said on that. It is real. It is here to stay, and it's the underlying technology that's interesting in terms of that ability to establish ownership. Authenticity would have been incredibly useful actually in terms of physical art sales. And I think about my world of culture label and things like that as well. And it just simplifies that process of tracking ownership and history and everything else. I also think there's been a lot of interesting experiments in the digital art world that now that this sort of technology is starting to mature, get more mainstream acceptance, will really start to accelerate over the next few years. So if you've been tracking the progress of businesses like Sedition, for example, that for a long time have been active in doing sort of producing a marketplace for digital artworks for some pretty well-known artists, people like Damien Hirst, Tracy Emin, have been involved in that and producing digital works. And what this technology then does to those sorts of marketplaces, it really is a convergence of two different things. And also, I think, imagine 5-10 years down the track in a world of convergence anyway, where films, games, everything is becoming as one, streaming all of these different platforms. Like, what are these digital creative experiences going to look like? More and more stuff's going to be in the digital realm anyway, and as good, or not better or worse, but a different and compelling experience, creative experience in the same way as you would get going into kind of any gallery. So of course these technologies are going to enable and help this. Then in terms of I guess sort of protecting your kind of intellectual property. I mean, again, I think these technologies are kind of interrelated in the opportunity to sort of track that a little bit better. And I think, as a number of the panelists have said, is it's going to be so important that we at a local level start developing new creative IP, and that's the kind of the opportunity here, because for the first time ever, we've all been focused. Yes, we can access digital content from anywhere in the world, but in terms of our sort of local creators, that everybody's having to focus on digital content creation. So how do we guide and support and protect that process? Because it's absolutely not perfect yet. It may never be, but I think it can never be an excuse not to try. And I think that's for me, that's been sort of some of the challenges where it's too complex, or I'm worried I'm going to get ripped off. And it's another kind of barrier that people sort of tend to kind of put up. Whereas actually I think you've just got to get with the program. That's where the audience is increasingly are. There was a great kind of stat that I heard the other day, and it was about kind of US teenagers. And we typically think about sort of US teenagers and where they would sort of hang out is, the mall and sort of places like that. And apparently now just 40% of US teens think the kind of mall is a cool place to hang out. Yet 50% say they use Fortnite primarily to socialize with friends. So, if you're going to go where the audiences are, you're talking about the kind of the digital space.
Right. Maybe Joe, because you have, Assistic has gone from a core business kind of evolved, right? From handling the kind of services for ticketing services and all, to now that it's almost a platform, right? For providing the content. So yeah, I'm quite sure as a platform, you have to deal this in terms of your agreement with the artists, with the people who purchase a service, and people who you're offering the services to as well.
I think we're still also struggling a little bit with how a content that is meant for physical, what does it mean when it's put onto a digital platform? I think we are all kind of growing, experimenting all at the same time, right? And I think the government policies, in a way, might also need some time to also catch up, to be in line with all this digital as well as physical restrictions. I mean, just to name one simple point, right? Like a rated content meant for physical, suddenly when you put online, the rating could change, right? Which is a bit kind of like strange to the majority of end consumers, right? Like, why will an M18 show physical becomes an R21 show when it's digital? I mean, it's the same me who is watching it, right? So, but the policies are like that. So how do we catch up? How do we deal with that? And then all the broadcast rights, whether it's a single view of the content versus repeat views. When it's digital, then you've always got the concern of whether it's downloadable, whether it could be restreamed somewhere else. So I think a lot of these concerns do exist. But I think over time, with technology, with policy, with our clients and patron acceptance, I think this will definitely change. But definitely, digital events and digital content is here to stay. That's for sure.
Right. And sorry, I know we ran out of time, but I still want to take a view. I mean, in the sense that we have come a long way since the Napster's day, right? And when it was mind-boggling that when users can just freely share to each other's music through their own terminal. So maybe a very quick point that you want to add on the IPR issue, please.
Yeah, so Joe's point about the broadcast rights, the challenges that they have over there. I mean, the challenges in the physical was already one thing in itself. Then you switch to digital, it's like, oh my God, what's going on? What is this? I spoke to a couple of promoters recently, good friends of mine, who can't navigate it because there are inherent issues around the idea about what is a linear stream, what is something that's a video on demand. So the same content that you create in a live stream and then you switch to a VOD, or you sell or you attach it to a video, it kind of creates layer and layer and layer. And actually, even if you've got it figured out, how do you even track down and pay the licenses accordingly is the next fun project that requires a lot of expertise. So actually, to kind of answer your question with also Viraj's question, because where do you see monetization of music? I want to kind of merge this on one single trend. I think we are slowly getting our head around this kind of user-generated or remixed content. How do we take something that exists, incorporate it within new works of art, and be able to both attribute and allow the original creator to also kind of participate in that monetization? And I think this is an interesting area of development that legally we have to have the legal infrastructure to allow for it, to facilitate for it, to strike the right balance of ease of use and attributing value. So it's really this user generated content. So if we look at digital platforms like TikTok, YouTube, they've Facebook, they started to create technologies that recognizes original pieces of content, whether that's through Content ID on YouTube, so they can recognize original work and then attribute value to that and properly license that content as well. So it's these are really ways in which these are basically ways in which we can kind of balance moving things forward and monetizing at the same time. Yeah, but the overwhelming trend is user-generated content, or value that comes from user-generated content, I think will be a huge driver. And it's a good thing for the populace, I think, because it means that art is way more accessible. And at the same time, if we nail this topic, the artists or the creators will still be able to monetize or extract value from that explosion of user-generated content.
Exactly. I think that increasing to digitalization, that increase in accessibility is something that there's still a whole huge kind of potential to be really explored and tap on, right? All right. We've come to almost 1.5 hours since it started, but the organizer Culture Academy has kindly told me that before we started that I can exercise a little bit of my moderator's right to extend a couple more minutes. And I know this morning we have talked many things, and some of these we have indicated some really great examples of how people are doing this. And we've seen that in the digital world, it doesn't matter that whether you are the current in the physical world, the big players like the big museum, or you are kind of smallish museum. But once you create the kind of right experience, your reach could even surpass, right, those kind of big boys. And of course, along the way, we also touch on so many issues, and particularly besides the potential, but also really the challenges. I think we do want to, it's not absolutely kind of easy, seeming just putting things online and the magic is going to happen. I think it's a very long, hard road ahead, and it's something that is really critical that not just the arts community alone, but the arts community have to kind of come into conversation with the technology sector, in fact, all the other whole kind of related industry as well, in order to really kind of make sense and really to kind of reap the reward and unlock the value in this. So to close off, I would just I want to end on a positive note that despite, as I say, all the challenges, despite that we are not kind of still we're not fully open up, the kind of SMM restriction in place, maybe I just like to invite the three of you again to just give a very quick take. What is your hope for when we on this topic? Yeah, and so that we know something that our audience can look forward. Very, very quick take, please. Yeah, 30-second take for each of you. Who would like to go first?
Maybe I can jump straight in first. Sorry, Peter.
Go.
Okay, I think digital content is here to stay, right? Digital. There's an entire cohort of audiences who are so into this digital space that digital content might be the only primary way of them engaging and consuming such content moving forward. So it's really, now is the time to really ride on this wave where acceptance is high, In certain cases, it is the only option because of physical restrictions. How do we now get things started, experiment with who would watch your content, who is your targeted audiences, what are the right price points to put up, what kind of content could we put up? Now, because it's digital, it also means that you're also not restricted to certain things that's digital. You could do overlays, you could have, mixed reality components in there, you could augment certain information that in the physical space, it doesn't exist. Technology has also come to a point where, from a visual, audio standpoint, certain recording that's digital could give you a very different sense of experience if you are listening with a good headphone in front of a screen and all of that, right? So I really think it's about experimenting and about testing things out and not being afraid to fail. And I'm very sure, and I'll speak on behalf of NAC for now, is that we'll be more than happy to really provide support to get some of this experimentation started, especially for the local arts.
Great. Yeah, thanks. Peter?
So I might finish on a positive note of a project that I'm working on at the moment with State Library Victoria in Melbourne. And it's a brilliant example, I think, of where cultural institutions are actually really well placed to do this stuff. So State Library Victoria, if you're not familiar with it, it is the most visited library in the world. It has over 2 million physical visitors in a non-COVID year, which is more than the British Library or the Library of Congress in the US. We decided that, you've got this huge kind of physical audience. How do we sort of develop sort of new experiences, both online, offline, and hybrid? And it's a much loved kind of public institution in Melbourne, the same way as I'm sure all the museums, cultural institutions are loved in Singapore. So we kind of opened up the doors and said, we want to find Victoria's best creators, many of whom are hurting, obviously, because they've had a really tough time during COVID. So that's in a really broad definition of creators. So technology-based creators, it might be arts-based creators. We want you to come up with new experiences for State Library Victoria. We'll give you access to those 2 million people, again, our spaces, our stories, our collections, but we want you to come up with the stuff that breaks all the rules that we would never come up with as a library. So we launched this campaign. It's called Alchemy. And it's had a ton of media coverage in Australia. It's been more successful than we could ever have imagined. But we had nearly 400 applications for some really incredible creators. And to bring it into digital, one of them was Mary has over 350,000 subscribers, 7.9 million views on TikTok. She's only been doing it for about 6 months. She was a student not that long ago. And what she does is she does art history through these short, succinct TikToks. So, everything from, the art of Bridgerton to, understanding modern art. So she was one of 14 people who applied to develop these experiences with a library. And like I said, we had VR experiences. We had one company's doing like an escape room. So it's a real kind of mixture, but it just showed the power of culture and cultural institutions. If they open their doors and they be a gateway to other creators, that actually what they can do together can be much more powerful than what either one of them can do alone. So I think this is all about collaboration. It's about experimentation. I think that's absolutely right. But also we have access to the most amazing collaborators in the cultural sector. And if we can, pull, down the drawbridge a little bit to let people in to say, actually, it's about, it's a bit like Emily Graslie in the Field Museum. How do we explore this territory together? That's where you're going to get the best results.
Thanks for the amazing example. Syaheed, I'm sorry, the call is counting down, but I'd still like you to give a very quick take on me.
I'll keep it very simple. I think my 2 big hopes is really this. One, I think the arts community, the culture community, I think will benefit tremendously from kind of embracing what they fear today and really kind of creating new experience from a very digital native perspective. And I think as both Joe and Peter have kind of given some examples, there are absolutely folks out there that are doing it that kind of probably aren't within the existing communities that we live under. Like, I mean, if I look at music, the music artists that kind of were birthed from SoundCloud or YouTube or even TikTok, they have figured it out and built sustainable, livelihoods for themselves at a rate that a big artist could not have envisioned, because they were kind of stuck in their old ways. They were very precious about their work. I think the positive way forward is to get to the heart of arts and culture, which is experiment. And I think speaking more specifically about like Singapore, I think, and I want to comment, I think the efforts of continued long-term investing in local artists and local production, because as I said earlier, I think there's an intrinsic value that is to be unlocked. We're such a young nation. There's a lot of experimentation and self-identification that still needs to happen. The voices are there, and so we're never going to, in the next 1 year or 2 years, digital or not, get the most value if we don't kind of like invest in in those local artists. So I think these are two kind of key trends and hopes that I have going forward as well.
Wow, thanks, Syaheed. Rightly ending on that note about really need to continue to invest in our people, in our artists, to do this. And in fact, the art sector is probably, we are the best place. We are in a good place, right? We do what we do best. We do innovate, to experiment and try new things out of this whole thing. Before I close, I'd just like to thank the participants for signing in today. And I want to thank all of you for putting in quite a number of good questions. And I apologize that we couldn't get to a lot of those questions. And also that I noticed one question, and I will use that to conclude my point, my hopes, because Kate, you asked for the database. You said that data is available on the NAC website, but essentially what I think when the 2 points I want to start and end is that I mentioned that when we did the COVID survey over the couple of months, the digital engagement for at least for the Singapore local residents are very high. It's almost above 80%. That was my first data point, right? Consistently above 80%. And even as we start to allow some live performances, it's still maintained at that kind of above 80%. So that's very positive. And I end off to the last data point, which is that when we ask them, are they prepared to still consume digital and online content or the arts? And more than 80% say that they will continue, despite if next time even we were to kind of resume fully in terms of live performances and events. So that kind of ties back to many of the hopes that you all have indicated. And I think moving forward there's a lot of potential and a lot of opportunity despite the challenges, but we feel that I think it's quite clear from today's sharing that the digital and the physical realm, and the digital is definitely not competing with the physical realm, but definitely can be very complementary if we find the right solution. So with that, I once again on behalf of the Culture Academy, thank you, Peter, Syaheed, and Joe, for this morning with us. And of course, to all of you, the participants, thank you so much for being with us here this morning. And I hope this is not the last of the conversation we talk about this, and hope that there'll be another occasion where we can come back and discuss further on this very critical topic on how to unlock the value of the arts in the digital realm. Thank you very much all. Thank you.
Thank you, Teong. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your questions. I think you would agree that it has been a very engaging session, and we hope that you have been inspired by how technology and digital platforms can be leveraged on to monetize arts and culture offerings. We would like to take this opportunity to thank our speakers and our moderator for sharing their insights and for the inspiring discussions we had today. We have come to the end of today's In Conversation with webinar. Before you leave the session, we would appreciate if you could provide us with your feedback for today's webinar. You may access the feedback form via the link or scan the QR code shown on the screen here. If you'd like to find out more about Culture Academy's programs, please visit www.cultureacademy.gov.sg, and you may check out our past webinars and resources that may be of interest to you. Thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar on the theme of data-driven decision making. Till then, stay safe and healthy. Thank you.